Sam Seder on the Majority Report. Emma Vigeland out today. Want to welcome back to the program Matt Duss. He's Executive Vice President at the Center for International Policy. Matt, it is very tempting to have you here when we're talking about foreign policy, just to say complete crap show and wrap up the interview. But I guess we should just go through the paces. Thanks so much for joining us. Why don't we start with the vote in the UN today? Not terribly surprising, at least in terms of what the United States did. But we had 14 UN security countries vote in favor of an unconditional ceasefire, and the U.S. shut it down.
Right. No, again, I mean, what is there to say here? The administration has claimed to want a ceasefire. It became President Biden's policy as of May 31, when he, went out and publicly made this proposal. And yet they clearly continue not only to oppose, or I would just say this, they have refused to put any pressure, real pressure, impose any costs on Netanyahu for his ongoing efforts to prevent a ceasefire. That's what we see. And I think a UN resolution of this kind would have been one of those ways to impose costs. And yet they refuse. And I would just add, the tension here, or just the outright hypocrisy. Just a couple days ago, we saw the United States, the UN representative, criticizing Russia for blocking UN action on Ukraine. This is both, I think, morally and ethically wrong, but just in terms of U.S. credibility and U.S. leadership, it is enormously damaging to our ability to promote a more peaceful world.
Matt, will you just slide your microphone over? And as you do, there is a quality that feels like, to me, and we should also say, there's, Bernie Sanders is introducing some resolutions today. We'll talk about that in a moment, in terms of cutting weapons transfers to Israel. But there's a real quality out of the Biden administration that they are. This feels sort of like, and both with Ukraine and this, and with Ukraine, I can understand it on some level. Mm-hmm. Well, I guess I can understand on both levels, but there's a real quality of like hopping in the getaway car and just like, I don't know, unloading all of, I don't know what the metaphor is, but there seems to be like a fervor to this that is like as if, Joe Biden is sitting in there going like, I'm going to remake the Middle East, even if it only, even if I only have like 6 weeks to do it at this point.
No, I think that's right. And, let's take these two things separately. First, on Israel, I think a lot of people, in my view, wrongly, kind of overstated the extent to which Biden's policy on Gaza was driven politically. It was just this idea that if I pressure Israel, or if I'm not seen as supporting Israel fulsomely enough, the Democrats will take political damage. But I think what we see now, and I've always thought that was a bit wrong, I think clearly now, even after the election is over, this would be a moment to really impose costs, to put pressure on Israel. And these resolutions from Senator Sanders are a perfect way to do it. It's a way for the Biden administration to say, listen, this is coming from Congress, Netanyahu, you need to take some steps and take this ceasefire deal that you've been blocking for the past months. But we see it's not about that. It's about Joe Biden's deep-seated, unshakable ideological belief that the U.S. should just unconditionally support Israel in whatever it's doing, no matter how grotesque, no matter how violent and destructive. Now,
I mean, is this just about protecting Israel, or is it also a more comprehensive, like, is there an end game here? I mean, does Biden have an end game in mind outside of, well, you tell me. I mean, because I can project into like what Donald Trump's end game is, to the extent that he has one. It's from Miriam Adelson, and it's honestly, we're going to annex the West Bank, and U.S. is going to sign off on it. There's going to be settlements in Gaza, and there's a hope that the Palestinian people essentially, become analogous to our indigenous people in this country, and just sort of like lose their ability to inhibit our growth, et cetera, et cetera. Is that what Biden's is? Or is it also include some notion of like isolating Iran? Like, what's the end game here?
Yeah, I mean, first on Trump, I honestly don't think Trump cares that much. He just knows that Miriam Adelson gives him a lot of money and that right-wing Christian evangelicals vote for him. And these are things both of those groups want. So he's just going to hand this over to whomever, David Friedman or Jared Kushner, and let them handle it. Now with Biden, as I said, it is just deeply ideological, but I do think, I'm not sure how much Biden himself, but clearly people around him like Brett McGurk, I think Jake Sullivan, Amos Hochstein, some of his closest advisors on this, seem to have this idea that, okay, well, Israel is deciding to continue to hit Hamas. They're hitting Hezbollah. They've hit Iran. And we're just going to kind of let them reshuffle the regional security deck in a way that's advantageous to them and potentially to us. And I think, the next time this kind of plan works will be the first. We have seen multiple efforts of precisely this kind. The Iraq War was an effort of this kind. Now, obviously, we had troops in the region, we invaded ourselves. It was different to that extent. But the basic logic, which is that, okay, we're just going to hit all of these groups. We're going to show strength. And then some things will happen and the situation will be more stable and more advantageous. But the long-term costs of this, I think, are going to be enormous. We're going to be dealing with this, the fallout from all of this for a generation.
Do you think they have some like scheme in their head? Because it feels like Saudi Arabia is already starting to shift their perspective on Iran. But do you think they have some type of like a perspective of, we just need some type of soft hegemony in that region, which will so that China does not have access to this oil, and we can basically, regardless of what price is associated with it or whatnot, obviously within reason, but basically we cordon this off. And this is, as we start to, enter into a new sort of potential Cold War, we need to have this area essentially.
Yeah, I think you just said the magic word here, which is China. China quickly has become the kind of focusing, like the lens through which all of U.S. foreign policy is now seen. Strategic competition with China. This shift started really under Trump, but the Biden administration really picked it up. And I think this is kind of the logic behind, the efforts to kind of have this tripartite U.S., Saudi, Israel deal that the Biden administration wasted, in my view, an enormous amount of time, energy, and resources trying to bring off. And the real focus of that, the real goal, was to box China out of the Middle East and to maintain the United States as the kind of regional security guarantor. And I think Saudi Arabia under Mohammed bin Salman has actually been very effective at sort of bidding the United States up. You go back a couple of years and you saw this Iran-Saudi détente that was, quote unquote, brokered by China, when in fact this had already essentially been negotiated. And they brought China in to take a few photos there at the end. Why? Who was the audience for that? It was Joe Biden. It was the United States, as if to say, listen, we can do stuff with China unless you're going to give us a better deal. Now, the real kind of what makes this so absurd is China actually has no real interest in supplanting the United States as the regional hegemon. Why in the world would they want that? They've watched the United States hemorrhaging resources and attention and capital and credibility over the past 3 decades plus. Why would they want a piece of that action? But basically, this is an effort, a very successful effort by some of our client states and partner states, to keep the United States engaged in the region in a way that benefits them.
But, my understanding is like this has been the agenda of neocons since the 1993, 92 Project for a New American Century document. I remember talking, I think I probably brought this up with you, with Gary Hart in 2004.
Yeah.
And him retelling, he was chairing with, I think it was Rudman, I can't remember who, a 21st century threats committee. And they went around it, and everybody was saying non-state actor, terrorist. One person said China. People all sort of laughed at that person. They came back 4 months ago. 4 months later, same thing. They went across non-state actors, China. They sort of laughed at that person. That person never came back to that. And it was, I think it was Lynn Cheney or Liz Cheney, who was sitting in on that committee at the beginning. And then I also remember being stuck in Long Beach, California, going on they have like a aircraft carrier museum there or something. I can't remember. And the guy doing the tour was talking about the Asian pivot. So we were already moving and this must have been 2010 maybe or so. I mean, so this has been like broiling underneath, simmering under the surface, but this was the McGurk's opportunity and others to really sort of go whole hog, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think, you talk about these different individuals, and I think some of them have different focus. They have different emphasis. I mean, McGurk is a Middle East guy, very close to the Gulfies, whereas I think Sullivan is someone who takes the broader view, but they all kind of agree that the United States needs to sustain its role as the kind of Middle East security guarantor. And, you reference some of these meetings, these going back to the 90s, the Project for a New American Century, these ideas about American power that are deeply rooted in the post-Cold War unipolar moment. And obviously that moment is over.
Right.
It has been over for years. Washington is only now starting to get the memo. So I look at these policies, which are just still kind of operating from that system, operating for that mindset, and trying to just frantically sustain American power. And it's, it reminds me of that scene in Young Frankenstein where they're trying to put a tux on American primacy and teach it to sing Putting on the Ritz. It's not going to work, but we're going to waste a lot of time and energy and lives and resources trying to sustain it. And that's a tragedy.
How much does our Ukraine policy, what's your before we move on to Ukraine, how do you anticipate this vote going down in the Senate today?
I mean, I think it won't pass. I mean, you will have one vote. I mean, each of these, there's 3 different joint resolutions of disapproval, each addressing a different form of arms that's being supplied. And each one will come up for, Senator Sanders will make a motion to put it on the floor for a vote. Then there will be a motion to table to put it aside, and that will win. Each of these will not go forward. So the question is, how many Democrats can you get to vote for it? I'd say if we get 10, even 12, I think that's a good outcome. I wish we could get more, because this is really not a question of, I know that, the forces on the right want to make this about do we or don't we support Israel. That's not what this is about. This is about, are we upholding the law with regard to how these weapons supplied by American taxpayers are being used. And we have just incontrovertible evidence that these weapons have been used over the past year in ways that egregiously violate human rights and international humanitarian law.
And we should also include in that, like these arms sales are under the Leahy law, conditioned upon who we sell them to not inhibit U.S. Aid or any aid for that matter. And they're clearly breaching that, even by the administration's own standards, as they set out in that letter, I don't know, 2 weeks before the election. Let's talk about Ukraine. Where this also feels like Biden thinks he has 2 months or a month and a half at this point, and they're literally throwing the kitchen sink at Russia. Is this an attempt to basically give Ukraine some leverage for when Trump comes in, or what?
I think it is. And again, I have 2 issues with it. One is I just haven't heard anyone explain to me how this changes the outcome or in any real way. I mean, sure, I think it does make sense that, listen, these attacks are being launched on Ukraine from Russian soil. It makes sense that Ukraine should have the right, the freedom to respond to attack inside Russia where these attacks on their territory are being made. But again, I think I would appreciate hearing how this kind of material changes the outcome. The theory of the case that the Biden administration has had from the beginning, which I think is sound, is we're going to support Ukraine's defense in such a way that puts them in the best possible position around the eventual negotiating table. I still think that's sound. I don't know how this helps that. Clearly, Putin seems very happy just to wait a few months until Trump's in office, where he knows he's going to get a potentially much better deal. Or any number of options could arise for him in that situation. And I will also say this: I mean, yes, Joe Biden is still the president. He is the president for a couple more months, but I do think it's worth acknowledging that Trump was elected having promised to bring this war to an end. I have very serious concerns about the manner in which Trump is going to do that, what kind of concessions he will force upon Ukraine in order to get that, that ceasefire or that so-called peace. And now for Biden to choose in these remaining months of the lame duck, which is his right to do, but to choose to do that, to escalate, after Trump has just been elected, having promised to de-escalate, that makes me a little uncomfortable, I have to say.
It is amazing to me that he feels comfortable sitting down with Trump, gleefully or even, drearily welcoming him to the White House, which, Trump has clearly set the precedent that you don't have to do that. But so Biden's sitting there protecting those norms, but at the same time, in far more material things, not just symbolic,
Right.
is escalating this, and with the full knowledge that all it can do really at the end of the day is, because Trump has now won, all it can really do is potentially go very, very sideways, but really could have no other impact down the road.
Yeah.
Trump's policy going forward, just briefly, because we'll spend more time on this in the future, but what do you anticipate? I mean, with a guy like, I don't know what to say about Hegseth, but Rubio, Secretary of State.
Yeah, I think that surprised some people because Rubio had been one of the most hardcore neocons in the Senate. But I was in Berlin just last week talking with some colleagues, some members of the political parties, and they were very curious and obviously very anxious about what Trump was going to bring, and they almost took some comfort from the Rubio nomination, because neoconservatism is at least part of the so-called consensus that they recognize, they understand it, agree or disagree, and I caution them to say, no, this does not mean that Trump is a neocon. This means that Marco Rubio has been housebroken. Because that is the overriding imperative. That is the key kind of qualification for any of these nominees, is that they are absolutely loyal to Trump. They have total fealty, because Trump learned the first time around that if you bring in these people who have their own ideas or who know, how the different bureaus and institutions work, they can kind of frustrate and put the brakes on some of his whims. And he is making absolutely sure that that will not happen this time. So he's bringing in people who will execute on everything he wants to do. Now, what will he want to do? It depends what he sees on TV in the morning. It depends, I guess, who gets in his ear at any given time to convince him of the right course of action. So that kind of reckless and dangerous unpredictability will still exist, but it's hard to say that there's much of a coherent ideology here beyond, as always, the glorification of Donald Trump. Now, he ran, interestingly, toward the end of the campaign, and I think this should be a lesson for Democrats. He and Vance both leaned in very hard to the anti-war message, because unfortunately the Democrats had left that lane wide open for them in a number of ways. I as in the first term, I don't think they're going to follow through on that. I think we're going to see, Trump finding ways to escalate, perhaps not, or probably not in sending troops, but let's remember, we came very close to open war both with North Korea and with Iran during the first Trump administration because of Trump's unpredictability. I think we really got lucky a number of times. I don't know how long our luck will last here.
Well, I think the only thing I can say is I think you're doing Trump dirty by not recognizing that he also probably wants to enrich himself. And so it's not just whim. There is an agenda. I think if he sees an opportunity to increase his family's wealth, I think
Yes.
that will happen.
I will hold myself accountable for that oversight. Thank you.
Yes. Well, next time maybe we'll do a full accounting. Matt Duss, always a pleasure. We will talk to you again soon, I am sure. Executive Vice President, the Center for International Policy. Thanks again. Much appreciated.
Hey, folks, don't forget to hit the subscribe button and check out our daily show. We do it every day at 12 p.m. Eastern for about 2.5 hours. We even take phone calls. You should check that out.